This wonderful gift of life that we have, what does it mean? What is its real value? Is it simply a collection of sensations, of feelings that we get as spectators? I'm sure that for many people that's what life is. The more pleasurable their collection of sensations, the more pleasant their feelings, the more enjoyable the things they see as spectators, the better their life is. And that's understandable. That's what life always has been for animals. And we are animals. We are creatures of instinct. And our instincts tell us to survive, to find food, to seek shelter, to reproduce, to avoid danger. In a prosperous, civilized society, the drive to satisfy these basic needs expresses itself as a quest for wealth, for enjoyment, for comfort. 1,000 years ago, our ancestors also sought wealth, enjoyment, and comfort. But they didn't believe that these things were quite as important as most people today think they are. In that age, before television, people were perhaps a little closer to the earth, and they were a little more aware of just how temporary an individual's life is. And they reached out for things with a little more permanence, things beyond wealth and comfort and pleasure, things which to them seemed to have more real meaning. I remember a few lines of poetry which expressed this feeling among our ancestors in Scandinavia, and more generally in the Germanic parts of Europe, back during the Viking Age. Those lines are, "Cattle die, and kinsmen die, and so must one die oneself. But there is one thing I know which never dies, and that is the fame of a dead man's deeds." For our ancestors 1,000 years ago, of course, cattle were wealth and kinsmen were power, and though they sought these things just as we do today, they understood that they were transitory. The value of these things was not permanent. The only thing that is permanent is the mark that one makes on the world with one's deeds. Everyone wants to live well, of course, but it is better to live effectively, to live so that one is remembered for what one has accomplished. And to put a little finer edge on the concept, it is not just fame in itself which is important. What counts also is the type of fame, the type of renown. The goal was to be remembered not just for being able to throw a spear farther than others, or to swing a battle axe harder, or to use a sword more skillfully. It was to be remembered for having lived a meaningful life, a significant life. For some, that meant a life of accomplishment, of changing the world. For others, it meant a life lived as closely as possible in accord with the ideals of personal honor and of service to one's people, so that one's life could be held up as a model and remembered as such. In any case, the life that had lasting value was a life of participation, never a life of sitting on one's hands and playing it safe. Perhaps too much television and too much comfort have caused us to lose sight of this very important thing which our ancestors understood. I think that they saw their individual lives more clearly in the larger context of the ongoing life of the race than we do. They were on more familiar terms with birth and with death than we are, and were not as likely as we are to slip into the folly of believing that they would live forever. And so, being constantly aware of the reality and inevitability of death, they were more concerned than we are to use their lives effectively and to give lasting meaning to them. For those of us today who do want to participate in life, who want to live significant lives. There is no more significant activity in which to participate than working to assure a healthy future for our people, for our European race. And there is almost no limit to the ways in which you can participate in this activity. Whether you're a housewife, or a computer scientist, or a machinist, or a secretary, or a bulldozer operator, or a law enforcement officer, or a teacher, or a writer, or an artist, you can participate. The only reason that a rabble of feminists and queers and Jews and blacks and mestizos and liberals and Clinton supporters are running America into the ground today is that decent people are sitting on their hands. If the decent people in America would get off their hands and accept personal responsibility for what is being done to their world, and if they would make a commitment and begin working together, we could sweep the whole Clinton coalition into the dustbin of history. It doesn't matter that the Clinton rabble outnumber us. We will whip them in a minute. We will have the media bosses jumping into the ocean all along the East Coast and swimming toward Israel as fast as they can go. But first, we must be willing to accept personal responsibility. And so, my message today to every decent person who is listening is this: don't be a shirker. Don't try to be a smart guy by continuing to cheer from the sidelines, but refusing to join the team and get out on the field. Stand up and become a participant in life. Make of your life a model that people will remember and talk about long after you're gone.
So the type of world we strive for depends upon our values, upon what we think is important. The person who believes literally in a biblical picture of heaven and hell, and whose primary motive is to avoid being cast into the fires of hell, will want a different sort of world from the completely self-indulgent person whose ideal is to be able to amuse or entertain himself in any way he chooses. And neither of these people is likely to be attracted to a vision of a world which is best for our race. So, before we begin describing our ideal world, let's be sure about what is really important to us. I can only tell you now what I believe is important, but I think that many listeners will agree with me, and so will share my vision of the sort of world for which we should strive. I'm a very race-conscious person, a person who is very conscious of the profound spiritual and psychical differences between my race and other races. And the world I want is one that provides the maximum scope for the spirit of my people to soar. A world that matches their inner nature. A world in which they are at home and can roll up their sleeves and go to work as if they were remodeling their own castles. A world in which they can unleash the full power of their imagination and of their creative spirit. A world in which the Faustian spirit of my people can exult in its striving to find and conquer new worlds, to perform noble deeds, and, in the words of Tennyson's Ulysses, to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bound of human thought. A world which matches our inner nature will be a world not too different from that in which our nature was shaped over thousands of generations in Europe. That was a world of mountains and forests and rivers and lakes and fjords and seacoasts. It was not the Semites' world of desert and bazaar, or the Negroes' world of jungle and dung-plastered huts, nor was it a world of asphalt and concrete and neon and billboards and diesel buses and fast food drive-thrus and pollution-spewing factories and mile after dreary mile of tenement houses. Well, in contrast to what I just said, it seems to me that there is a portion of the nominally white population of the United States whose nature has been shaped during the past 3 or 4 generations by concrete and asphalt and billboards and subway trains and trash-filled vacant lots. One sees a lot of these people in places like New York City, but I'm not convinced that they should be counted as white any longer, these raceless urban lemmings. So we might begin our description of the sort of world we want by talking about the natural environment and the way in which our people should fit into that environment. We need, for one thing, a much lower average population density than we have now in North America and in Europe. Instead of a North America with a rapidly growing population of 300 million featherless bipeds of every known ethnicity, I have a vision of a continent with a stable population of 50 million European Americans, saner, healthier, stronger, better-looking, and more intelligent European Americans than is the norm for most parts of the continent today, and no non-whites at all. And I have a vision of these 50 million white North Americans living and working in a land of regrown forests and unpolluted rivers and lakes and clean air, a land without litter along its roads and pathways, and with bears and wolves and mountain lions and eagles returned to their natural habitats and forming once again a natural part of our environment. And in my vision, a substantial part of these regrown forests and unpolluted rivers and lakes are in the public domain. In fact, a continuous public domain stretching from coast to coast between and around private holdings. And I envision no cities, certainly none of the sprawling, noisy, congested asphalt and concrete monstrosities surrounded by smoke-belching factories, clogged freeways, and honky-tonk strips with which we are all too familiar today. Towns with populations of no more than 10,000 should be adequate for commercial centers, manufacturing centers, educational centers, and any other sort of facility requiring the cooperative efforts of a couple of thousand people. I'm assuming, of course, modern transportation, communication, and manufacturing methods, even plants for smelting ore, producing steel, or making ball bearings, if designed and operated to take advantage of modern technological developments, should be able to do without the huge concentrations of labor used today. In fact, I believe that ultimately we can do without an urban proletariat altogether. It is unrealistic to try to plan things in too much detail now. But a good approach to the problem of who does the dirty work is the sort of thing the Germans did in the 1930s, with every young person going through a period of a couple of years of labor service, regardless of whether he was destined ultimately to be a poet or a factory owner or a farmer or a research scientist. That not only gets the garbage collected and the tomatoes picked, but it pulls the community together and minimizes inter-class hostility. The Germans had many other excellent ideas which were put into practice in the 1930s. Ideas about housing and transportation and industrial management and labor relations and community structure and the raising of children and the training of young people and public health and so on. We can learn much from a study of what they accomplished before we all were tricked into a horribly destructive and unnecessary war which switched the whole world off the track of racial progress and onto the ruinous track of multiculturalism.